Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome back. Lecture 13 will cover data and surveys. The different concepts covered in this lecture are primary and secondary data, measurement scales, attitudinal scales, data types, data collection techniques, and good quality data and data cleaning. So data could be both primary and could be collected from both primary and secondary sources, and accordingly they are called primary data and secondary data. Primary data is collected from first hand. It's a raw data that is collected directly either through experiments or through face-to-face interviews or even through online service. So we directly collect this data, and one good example is of course the household travel diary survey. So this is an example of primary data collection, and this kind of data is of course because we are designing the service, it would be relatively free from bias, or we can design it to be free from bias. Then we can collect data as required, and also we can do additional surveys or additional data collections could be also done during surveys. We can also revisit the responder in case there is any requirement, like for example we find some of the data is missing, we can again revisit the responder and we can again survey them, which is not possible in case of secondary data sources. Secondary data sources are already published, and they could be obtained from documentary search of journals, books, reports, newspaper, online data archives, different websites, and so on. So one good example is the Census of India dataset. So from there we can get data for different urban areas or rural areas, for different the households, and for all the other data that is collected during census survey. And usually this data is used, the secondary source data is cheaper compared to primary data, because we have to invest a lot of money for surveyors, we have to also take the surveys to the survey area and so on. So of course collecting using secondary data is cheaper, but it may be old, so that's why we have to do primary data collection. And sometimes primary data is not available, then we also go for secondary data sources. Sometimes responders are unwilling to give us data, or sometimes the situation is such that we don't have access to a particular population, or we don't get permission because of ethical reasons, or ethical permissions are not always available based on the situation at that point of time, or primarily due to resource constraint, that is time and cost or money. People usually use secondary data instead of primary data. Now, even though both the data could be utilized, both either primary data or secondary data, and in most cases we use both primary data and secondary data. And secondary data is usually required to identify the research gaps, enhancing the background and understanding of the research problem. So basically studying the secondary data sources, we can understand which are the areas which have been already covered, and we can identify which of the areas which have not been covered, and that we can cover in our surveys and all. We can get longitudinal data or panel data. What it means, we can get data from previous years, which could be helping us to do our projections and match it with our existing data to see if the projection matches, or using the existing data and the longitudinal data available from secondary sources, we can even project it for future years. And also secondary data can itself act as a unit of analysis. For example, when we do a study on transport legislation, acts, bills and regulations, the documents itself becomes data. So data needs to be measured. So there are also different measurement scales. We first have the nominal scale, and in nominal scale, data is labeled, like for example, gender, religion, we can label the data as male or female, or in religion we can give different, for each religion we can have different categories, and here we can measure the frequency of the data, and also we can identify individuals with each label that is given to him. But we don't have a lot of other things cannot be done with this data. We cannot add up two male or two different persons. So in that way we can say there are two persons, which is frequency, but we cannot directly add two persons. So in that way, nominal scale is data is labeled, and the central tendency that we use is mode. And for hypothesis testing that we have discussed in earlier lecture, we have to do non-parametric tests such as chi-square test, where we check the observed and predicted frequency, and this actually helps us to test if a statement regarding a population parameter is statistically significant or not. So that is why we need to do hypothesis testing. So in case of ordinal scale, data is labeled, and it also, along with it being labeled, it also follows an order. So that means it is if there are 3 categories or 4 categories, we will say the second category is higher than the first category, but we cannot say how much higher, or the third category is higher than the second category, but again we cannot say how much higher. So this one example are Likert scales, where we set the scale like strongly agree, neutral, and so on. So this kind of scale is called ordinal scale, and here the central tendency is median. And again, for hypothesis testing, we use non-parametric tests such as Mann-Whitney U-test or Wilcoxon matched pair test. So these are the different methods of hypothesis testing. Now next comes the interval scale and the ratio scale. Both are almost similar with a small difference, and both the scales measure these are for numerical measurements. These are used for numerical measurements. And for example, in the interval scale, we not only can name or label the variables, it is also ordered, and there is a proportionate interval between the variables. That means between strongly agree and then agree and neutral, we cannot say the gaps are same. But here in interval scale, I can say that if there are 4 categories, the gaps would be same. For example, if I measure the same response, like if I agree in a 10-point scale, and we say that measure using 1 to 10, then I can say that okay, 1 to 2 and 2 to 3 has equal difference. In that case, we can say it is proportionate. But even the better example is to say that, like for example, temperature, if I say 1 degree increase in temperature, then it's a proportionate increase. That means from 0 to 1 and 1 to 2 is basically the same increase. So that's a proportionate, so that interval between each scale, each value is maintained. And there is another thing, that is there is no absolute 0. Even in temperature, I say 0 degree, it's relative. So there is no absolute 0 in this particular scale. Whereas in ratio scale, everything else remains same, but we can also have absolute 0. For example, in case of height, weight, we can have 0 weight or we can have 0 height. So both the scales are more or less same with this minor difference. And the central tendency measure for this particular scales are, it could be either mean, median, and mode, and we can also determine the standard deviation. And for hypothesis testing, we usually go for t-test, f-test, and ANOVA. So looking at attitudinal scales, there are different ways we can measure attitudes. For example, in this particular example, you can see if I ask you metro is more comfortable than air-conditioned bus, so people based on their attitudes, they can give a certain rating. So this is measured using strongly agree, uncertain, strongly disagree, and disagree. So I can put also values into that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But of course, the gap between 1 and 2 and 2 to 3 is not necessarily the same. That means people may feel the difference between strongly agree and agree may be a lot, whereas from uncertain and agree the difference is very less. So this can be possible. And when we measure attitudes, and there is one problem that happens, because we are, as you can see that I've used numbers, then particularly in case of scales which have got lesser number of categories, or like for example a 5-point Likert scale, sometimes researchers or in statistics we often treat them as interval scale. We assume that the difference between very satisfied and satisfied is same as the difference between neutral and not satisfied. So we sometimes assume that the difference is same so that we can do statistical calculations. But this is a risky assumption and should be avoided if possible. Now sometimes it's difficult, we can always increase this particular category from 5-point to a 10-point scale. In that case, what happens, because of so many categories, the gaps, even though there may be difference, people may assume that the difference are almost same. So however, we can say that we can use a numerical scale with higher number of categories, which we can treat as an interval scale, like satisfaction from low 1 to high 10, and the ranges, the different categories could be 1, 2, 3 to the point 10. Here it's still possible to be considering it as sort of an interval scale, but it's better to be using a different scale instead of a Likert scale for this. But in case of in India, suppose we go for surveying and asking people about satisfaction about a certain feature. If I give them a 10-point scale, or if I give them a 3-point scale or a 5-point scale, we first need to find out which people are comfortable with, and then we have to use that particular scale. So even though a scale of 10-point scale may be suitable for doing statistical measurements, sometimes we may find that people are not properly able to rate using a 10-point scale. They may feel comfortable using just a 3-point scale or maybe a 5-point scale. So that is why this question arises, that we should be very careful when we use a Likert scale, which is ordinal, basically ordinal in nature. And if we use statistical calculations, then we have to have justifications and particular, the importance why we are doing that particular calculation. So in addition to Likert scale over here, we also have two more scales to measure attitude. One is called a Thurston scale and the other is called a cumulative or Gutmann scale. So in this particular, these are not used or common as so much common as Likert scale, but in Thurston scale, we calculate a weight or attitudinal value for each statement. That means for every statement that is made, we give a weight to that particular statement, and it is to some way it is subjective based on the judge who is actually giving that statement. But at the same time, this is another way of measuring which is different from Likert scale. And in cumulative or Gutmann scale, this is a little bit difficult way to measure attitudinal values, where this scale is unidirectional, and with every step the difficulty increases. For example, we have a 10-point scale, so this is sort of ordered. So 2 is more difficult than 1, or probably has more categories, more features than 1. 3 has got even more features than 2, but includes all features of 1, 2 as 1 and both 1 and 2, and so on. And in that way, we can say that when a person gives 8, that means he is agreeing to everything till 8, and above 8 he doesn't agree. So that is a complex scale to design. So this is called a cumulative scale. So these are the 3 different attitudinal scales which are also important in transportation research. So there may be other ways to also categorize data. For example, we can categorize data as qualitative as well as quantitative. Now, as you can understand, qualitative data can be of different kinds. It could be measured in a subjective way. For example, we can measure emotion, perception, feelings by writing about it. So it's a little bit subjective. Or we can do a detailed study of the attributes or situation. So that could also, we can study each of those aspects in detail. So this is a qualitative data, and we can either this kind of data could be measured using descriptive statistics, or it could, not statistics, it's descriptive. We can describe that particular aspect, or it could be we can measure it also using a nominal scale. So the descriptive is non-numerical. We cannot make statistical estimates on that, but it's a description of the particular data. And then this kind of data collection could be done through in-depth interviews, observational methods, document reviews, focus group discussions, and so on. So this is a qualitative method where we are mostly trying to understand the subject, and we want to study the entire thing in detail. And in this case, the questionnaires could be a little bit open-ended and less structured, because people can have a discussion, and the discussion, the way the discussion is going, the surveyor can ask certain kinds of questions, and he can also lead the way the questions are being asked. So that is why it is a little bit open-ended. And one example is, if I ask a person to describe why do you like the new neighborhood, he may give us many reasons why he likes it. So it could be recorded in a qualitative. We can say that the data is qualitative in nature in this case. The data could be also quantitative. That means we can do statistical analysis and in some certain interpretations with this particular data. That means there is some way to measure it, giving some measures, such as it could be measured using an ordinal scale, it could be measured using an interval scale, or it could be measured using a ratio scale. And here also again we can collect the data using face-to-face interview, doing pick-up, drop-off, and online surveys. We will discuss all these survey methods after a few slides. And this kind of surveys could be both close-ended as well as structured. And for example, we ask a person specifically that what is his monthly average household income. So he can tell us that, okay, per month, what is his average income, and that is a figure which we can also do some statistical calculations with that figure. So that's why this is called quantitative data. Data could be also categorized as, there are two other ways we can say data could be categorized. One is categorical data, another is numerical data. So categorical data, as you can understand from the term, this is all about categories. We can break the entire data set into different categories, or each individual could be marked as, or the property that we are serving could be categorized. And numerical means we can give a numerical measure to that particular aspect that we are serving. And then again, numerical data could be either discrete or continuous. Discrete means like an integer. For example, we can say how many number of cars a family own. We can say a family own 1 car or 2 cars. So a family cannot own 1.5 car. So it's a discrete value. But if I say what is the age of a person, or weight of a person, we can say weight is 50.5 kilograms. So that means we have a continuous scale. Our weight could be anything in between. So that's why this numerical data could be again discrete or continuous. Categorical data are measured using either nominal or ordinal scale, whereas interval and ratio scales are used for measuring numerical data. So these are the different data sets, data types that we can use in our surveys. Now coming to data collection techniques, particularly for primary survey, we have different data collection techniques such as observational surveys, focus group discussion, household personal interviews, telephonic surveys, self-completion surveys, and intercept surveys. So in observational survey, data are collected through observations and without any interactions with any particular person or individual. So it could be either direct or indirect. And for example, if we most of the transportation surveys like transportation inventory survey, traffic count surveys, at link counts, intersection counts, cordon counts, or traffic performance surveys like travel time surveys, intersection delay surveys, level of service surveys, then commuter tracking surveys like verification of the travel diary data with help of the GPS of commuters, mobile phone. This kind of surveys are all direct observational surveys. That means we are directly observing the characteristics of the phenomena that we are studying. So that is a direct observational survey, whereas an indirect observational survey is related with where we are not observing the actual phenomena, but we are looking into other things which actually indicate that particular phenomena. For example, we have got accident debris or skid marks. If we look at those things along particular road stretches, we can understand which are the places where there this kind of skid marks, which are the sections of the highway which are hazardous, and it could also help us to identify locations where there is more chance of accident taking place. So this is an indirect observational survey. Then focus group discussion. This is where a group of people share their experience, attitudes, and belief about a particular issue. This is done to understand the basic research problem And this means that we take a group of people. It may be a homogeneous group or a heterogeneous group as per the requirement. For example, if we want to get feedback about the entire village, we will bring different representative of different groups from the village. But we are serving only cyclists of, then we are, attitudes or perception of cycle users, then we will only collect cycle users and we will bring them together. We will have a discussion with them. The discussion could be to some extent structured or unstructured, or it could follow a script, and there is a person who is there is a expert who is trained in this kind of service, who would be actually guiding the discussion, who prevents deviation from the topic of discussion. And when people share their experiences, attitudes and beliefs, then automatically the researcher gets some more in-depth understanding of the problem, and using that understanding he can design his service or include certain variables in the service which you would have otherwise missed. So that is why a focus group discussion is important. And in addition to all this, the responder's attitude can also be studied by experts. The person who is serving, he can also see how people feel about the topic that they are discussing. Quantitative measures or for statistical analysis is possible, but it is not common. That means we usually don't ask people to again rate their experience or rate their perception about a certain thing during a focus group discussion, but still it could be also done. And sometimes we have difficulty in collecting a focus group. That means to bring the target people together, that sometimes becomes a challenge because all people are not available at the same point of time. And sometimes people start talking about their personal events or socially sensitive things. So this has to be avoided during focus group discussion. Then comes the household personal interview service. This is the most common service that we do in transportation planning, and particularly for travel diary collection and all. Travel diary data collection, we use personal service at the households. We go to each household, and at the responder's home we do the survey, a face-to-face survey. And the interviews are most cases structured, but sometimes it could be unstructured. And structured means we use a questionnaire to survey, and it is suitable for both qualitative and quantitative surveys. And we can use either an opinion survey or attitude survey or open-ended questions. Anything could be taken up in this kind of service, because we are doing face-to-face, and whichever way we feel appropriate should be taken up. And we can also record the responder's attitude in this kind of service. And because the survey is in front of us, the questions could be easily explained to the surveyors, explained to the people whom we are surveying, and this actually reduces errors or also increases the response rate for this kind of service. But challenges, this, as you can understand, when we send a surveyor to a person's household, it takes a lot of time, so it is expensive. So and also traveling from one household to another household, it takes a lot of time, so there is travel time is involved. And then of course, because a surveyor is an individual, there is certain bias that comes because of he conducting the survey. So a person may be talking or focusing on certain things, and this is called a surveyor's bias, personal bias. So next is telephonic survey. This is an alternative to the household survey, and it is very popular in developed countries because it's difficult to go to home. So, and because people are more or less they are well off, so everybody has got a telephone. And sometimes when these telephonic surveys are done, these are also computer assisted, and this can save time and energy from digitization. That means whatever is being responded to, automatically that gets recorded, and also it goes into the database. And this kind of service could be done for larger geographical areas and at lower cost compared to household service, and it could be also centrally controlled. And this is also good for multilingual societies where there are different people of different people speaking different kind of languages reside together. So sending a surveyor who knows all the languages are difficult, but through a telephone this is not an issue. And we can also select a convenient time of the responder for his response, which also improves the quality of the response. So this is also one alternative to household service. Self-completion surveys are the ones where a person has to himself fill up the responses, and this could be done in three ways. It could be either done through mail, which is the most cost friendly and most sustainable way to do the survey, or it could be delivered by the surveyor to each household and the responder has to return it on their own. And finally, we can both the survey could be dropped, survey form could be dropped off and picked up from the households, from the household directly. So this actually increases the response rate, because if the person knows that somebody is going to come and collect the form, he will definitely fill up the form. Then comes intercept survey, and sometimes it's difficult to conduct surveys inside a house, and sometimes we require a person to collect or rather to we want a person to when we want to survey a person, we want to survey a particular facility or a particular infrastructure. We want to do the survey over there so that we actually get the persons who are using the infrastructure. If we do household survey, probably the sample size would be much larger. So, for example, we are doing a survey of public transit. It is better to conduct the survey on board of the public transit vehicle so that we actually get public transit users. Or when we do surveys at the cordon points, it's better to survey there so that we get to know the people who are using those cordon points. And similarly, for shopping centers, workplaces, or transport nodes such as airports, we can do the surveys over there. So these are called intercept surveys. And there are different kinds of intercept surveys. It could be face to face. It could be onboard distribution of the forms, and people can mail back those forms, or onboard distribution, and it would, after a certain time, it would be collected back, or onboard distribution and collection, and both collection and mail back both are allowed. If somebody is not able to complete it, then he can mail it back later on, or roadside distribution and mail back, or distribution and mail back at activity center. These are the different ways we can do intercept surveys. Now, when we conduct surveys, we should also ensure that the data that we collect is of good quality. Otherwise, the analysis that comes out of the data is also going to have certain limitations. So, to do that, we need to make sure that the input that is coming into the survey, that is a valid input. For example, when a vehicle, for number of vehicles in a household, it should be an integer input. That means the surveyor should be careful about that, or the researcher should make sure that the surveyors have done these inputs properly. So type of data is important, and also the range of data is important. So if suddenly a person records that age is 120 years, then that means it's a wrong input. So these are the things that needs to be checked to see if the data is valid. Then we should see if the survey is complete. We cannot accept a survey which is incomplete or partially filled, and in that case either we can cancel the survey, or we can ask the interviewer to redo the survey once more. So or fill up go to that particular person and again redo the survey. And so this is how we can ensure completeness of the data. Consistency, for that means we have to also check the data consistency in between suppose two data. For example, the same responder who is less than 18 years says that he drives to his school or his college, so which is probably not true because he doesn't even have a license. So this contradictory input in the survey has to be checked. So we have to check the survey for consistency, and then we have to make sure that the different units that we collect are all of the same type, and there should also be no outliers in the data. That means any data value which is significantly different from all other data points should be avoided. And so the different steps that we need to do to achieve a good quality data set is, first of all, we need to inspect the data, then we need to clean the data, then also we need to recheck the data after cleaning if everything is fine, and finally we have to record all the steps that we have undertaken to clean the data, so that we have a report on that. So in case there is some problems or errors happening later on, we can trace back where the error has originated. So coming to data cleaning, this is a very important step in the survey process, or rather once the survey is done, the data has to be entered. So before analysis can start, we need to do data cleaning. What it means is we can only take the data that is relevant for our analysis. For example, we can remove the name of the person from a travel demand estimation survey because that is not relevant. We can remove duplicate data and outliers. Using certain techniques, we can remove outliers. For example, if we do a regression, then the cloud, we will find there is a certain area where there is lot of points which are concentrated, and then there are certain points which are very far away from the regression line. So these are the points which we can remove, which will improve the regression results. Or we can use a quartile, measure as well to determine for which of the data we are going to keep. So that is removing of outliers. And then we can also considering the missing values, if we find that in a sample maybe one or two fields are missing, everything else is there, and it's very difficult to go back and conduct the survey again. So in that case, what we can do is we can either cancel the entire sample, or we can accept the sample and fill those particular empty attributes using the mean, median, or certain trends, like using a regression, those particular values for those particular attributes. Now, as you understand that we are taking the average value of the entire data set to fill this up, so that if the sample is consistent, but at the same time it may introduce bias in the data, because we may have too many data which is towards the central tendency, which is concentrated towards the central tendency of that particular data set. So this is one problem that can arise, but if there is few cases like this, we can go ahead and do this. Then we can deal with inconsistent values. For example, we can re-interview the responder or reject the sample. So if we find that the certain inconsistencies are there, we need to be careful about the syntax errors, the blank spaces that is there in the data. We need to also check the nature of the data, if it is binomial, continuous, integer, interval, nominal, and accordingly we have to select the kind of analysis that we do. Like in Likert scale, if it is ordinal, we have to do appropriate analysis for that. And then we need to standardize the entire data, like somewhere we have some surveyor has collected kilograms, weight in kilograms or in pounds. We have to bring all the data to the same unit. And we need to sometimes transform the data, like we need to scale the data or do a conversion of the data. Data is in dollars, we need to convert it into INR, Indian rupees, or we need to scale it, like for example, data is the data could be using a logarithm scale, we can scale it down. So depending on the requirement of the work or the analysis that we are doing, we can do these changes. And finally, we can also normalize the data. So that means adjusting values when we are using data of different scales. We can also bring it to a same format by normalizing it. What it means is adjusting values measured on different scales to a common scale, and this could be done using standard scores, standard t-statistics, and so on. So these are the different ways we can do data cleaning, or we can achieve data cleaning. So these are the references that you can use for this particular lecture. So in conclusion, we can say appropriate type of data should be chosen for either recording survey observation or for measuring survey response. Likert scale is the most popular attitudinal scale, but care should be taken to consider the responses from the survey as ordinal. The choice of survey technique depends on the purpose of data collection, accuracy required, and resources available, including manpower, time, and money. And the data collected should be of good quality, and it should be cleaned thoroughly before any analysis. Thank you.